She had always been the quiet one in the room, not because she had nothing to say, but because she learned early that the world did not always listen. While others spoke loudly and confidently, she listened. She noticed small things like how sounds changed with space, how emotions could hide behind smiles, and how silence could sometimes be louder than words. Music entered her life gently. There was no big moment, no grand piano in a bright hall. It began with an old, slightly broken keyboard that belonged to a neighbor who no longer used it. Some keys were heavier than others, and a few made strange sounds, but to her, it felt like magic. She pressed a key and felt something move inside her chest. It was as if the sound understood her in a way people never quite did. She never had lessons. Money was always tight, and music was considered a luxury, not a need. So she learned by listening. She watched videos when she could, replaying parts again and again. She sat for hours trying to match sounds by ear. Many nights, she played softly so she would not disturb anyone. The keyboard became her safe place, where mistakes were allowed and no one laughed. As time passed, music became more than a hobby. It became how she dealt with disappointment, stress, and loneliness. When things went wrong, she did not shout or complain. She played. When she felt invisible, she played. Every note carried a piece of her story, even if no one else could hear it. Outside her small world of quiet practice, life moved fast. People around her were quick to judge. They valued confidence, loud voices, and visible success. Skill, to them, meant certificates, formal training, and public approval. She had none of those. To most people, she was just someone who liked music, nothing more. She rarely spoke about her piano playing. When asked about hobbies, she mentioned simple things. She had learned that sharing too much often led to unwanted opinions. A few times, when people discovered she played, they smiled politely, the kind of smile that did not expect much. Some even joked lightly, asking if she could play children's songs. She laughed along, hiding how those moments stayed with her longer than she liked to admit. There was one place where music was treated seriously. A community space where people gathered for events, small performances, and social evenings. It was known for attracting people who believed they understood art and talent. She went there sometimes not to perform but to listen. Sitting in the back, she watched others play with confidence, receiving applause and praise. Part of her admired them. Another part wondered if she would ever belong there. She told herself she was content just listening, that playing at home was enough. Yet every time she heard the piano in that room, something inside her stirred. Her fingers would move slightly, imagining the keys. She pictured herself sitting there, not for attention, but to share the feeling she carried inside. Then doubt would follow. She reminded herself that people there expected perfection. Her life outside music was ordinary. She worked hard, helped when she could, and tried not to take up too much space. People described her as kind, calm, and reserved. Very few knew how much emotion lived behind her quiet behavior. She had learned to keep it hidden, like a fragile thing that could break if exposed. One evening, the space was fuller than usual. There was laughter, conversation, and the sound of glasses touching. The piano stood in the center, polished and waiting. Several people took turns playing short pieces. Some were good, some average, but all were confident. Applause followed each performance, sometimes polite, sometimes enthusiastic. She sat near the side, as usual, hands folded, listening closely. With every performance, her chest felt tighter. Not from jealousy, but from a longing she tried to ignore. She told herself she was fine where she was. Still, she stayed until the end, even when she could have left early. As the night went on, the mood became more casual. People talked louder. Someone suggested that anyone could play if they wanted. A few laughed at the idea. The piano, once respected, became more like entertainment. That was when someone noticed her. A voice called out, light and teasing, pointing her way. Someone mentioned they heard she played piano. She felt her face warm instantly. Eyes turned toward her. Some were curious, others amused. She smiled nervously and waved it off, saying she just played a little. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. The attention lingered. Comments followed, half joking, half challenging. She felt the familiar pull between wanting to disappear and wanting to be honest. Her heart beat faster, not from excitement, but from fear. She looked at the piano, then back at the people watching her. Memories of late nights, sore fingers, and quiet determination flashed through her mind. This room did not know her story. They did not know what music meant to her. To them, she was just the quiet one in the corner. She took a slow breath. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for sure. Music had never failed her before. And even if the world did not listen, she had learned how to speak through sound. The room buzzed with expectation and doubt, and she sat there, standing at the edge of a moment that could change how she saw herself forever. The attention stayed on her longer than she expected. What began as a light comment turned into a moment where the whole room seemed to wait for her response. She felt her shoulders tighten as a few people smiled, not in a kind way, but with curiosity mixed with doubt. It was the kind of look people give when they are already deciding what they believe about you. She tried to laugh it off again, saying she was not good enough to play there. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the noise. Normally, that would have been enough. Normally, people would move on. But this time, someone pushed a little harder, saying that everyone should have a turn, that it was just for fun. Then came the comment that changed the feeling of the room. A man sitting near the piano leaned back in his chair and smiled. His tone was casual, but his words carried weight. He said something about how playing piano takes real skill, not just pressing keys at home. A few people laughed. Not loudly, but enough. Enough for her to feel it. Her stomach dropped. She felt small, like she was back in those moments when people assumed things about her without knowing anything real. She looked down at her hands, suddenly unsure where to put them. The warmth in her face turned into something heavier, almost like shame. The man continued, not directly cruel, but confident in his opinion. He spoke about training, about proper technique, about how the piano in that room deserved someone who knew what they were doing. His words were wrapped in humor, which made them harder to challenge. Laughing comments often are. She noticed how some people avoided looking at her. Others watched closely, waiting to see what she would do. No one defended her. No one told him to stop. Silence, in that moment, felt louder than the laughter. Her first instinct was to disappear. She imagined standing up, making an excuse, and leaving quietly. That was what she had always done. Avoid conflict. Avoid judgment. Protect the part of herself that mattered most. But as she sat there, something unexpected happened. Along with the fear, there was another feeling. A quiet frustration. Not at him alone, but at herself. At how many times she had stayed silent. At how often she let others decide her limits. She remembered sitting alone at night, fingers sore, replaying the same piece until it finally sounded right. She remembered moments when music was the only thing that made sense. None of that effort lived in this room yet. None of it had been heard. The man looked at her again and raised his eyebrows slightly, as if waiting for her to agree with him. That small gesture hurt more than the laughter. It assumed she already knew her place. Someone else joked that maybe she could try a simple tune. Another laugh followed. It was not meant to be cruel, but it was careless. Careless words can still cut. Her heart beat faster. She felt torn between two paths. One led away from the room, back to safety, back to silence. The other led toward the piano, toward exposure, toward the risk of confirming everything they already believed. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. In that short pause, she reminded herself why she loved music in the first place. It was never about applause. It was never about proving people wrong. It was about honesty, about letting feeling turn into sound. When she opened her eyes, the room felt different. Not quieter yet, but heavier. She stood slowly, surprising herself as much as anyone else. A few conversations stopped. Chairs shifted. The man near the piano watched with interest, clearly not expecting her to move. She walked toward the piano, each step feeling unreal. Her legs felt weak, but she kept going. She could hear whispers behind her, feel eyes following her. Every doubt she had ever carried seemed to walk beside her. She stopped next to the piano and hesitated. Up close, it looked larger, more serious than the instruments she practiced on at home. The keys were smooth and clean. For a moment, fear rushed back in. The man spoke again, lightly suggesting she take her time. His smile had not faded. It wasn't angry or mean. It was confident, certain. She sat down. The bench felt cold. Her hands rested on her lap as she took a slow breath. The noise in the room had faded into a low hum. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears. This was the point of no return. She placed her fingers on the keys but did not press them yet. She adjusted her posture, not because she had been taught, but because it felt right. For the first time that night, she stopped thinking about the people behind her. She thought about the nights when music was the only thing that listened. She thought about how sound could say things words never could. She reminded herself that even if she failed, this moment was hers. The room waited. The man leaned forward slightly, curiosity replacing humor. Others held their breath, some out of politeness, some out of expectation. She lifted her hands, ready to play. Whatever happened next would no longer belong to the laughter. It would belong to the truth she carried within her, waiting to be heard. The room felt unusually still once she sat down. It was not silent yet, but the noise had softened, as if everyone sensed something was about to happen. She rested her hands above the keys, not touching them, letting the moment settle. Her breathing was slow but deep, the way it always became when she focused on music. She could feel eyes on her back, but she did not turn around. Looking back would pull her out of the place she needed to be. Instead, she stared at the keys in front of her. Black and white, simple, honest. They did not judge. They only responded to touch. Her fingers hovered, unsure at first. Doubt crept in again, whispering that this was a mistake, that she should stand up and laugh it off before it was too late, that the man behind her would be proven right. But then another thought followed, quieter but stronger. She reminded herself that she had already lived through worse moments than this. She had faced silence, loneliness, and nights where nothing felt certain. Compared to that, this was just sound and space. She let her shoulders relax. Her hands lowered slightly, feeling the cool surface of the keys. She pressed one gently, not enough to make a sound, just enough to feel it respond. The piano felt different from her old keyboard. Heavier, more alive. The room waited. She closed her eyes for a second and chose what she would play. Not something complex, not something meant to impress. She chose something honest. A piece shaped by emotion rather than rules. Something that belonged to her. When her eyes opened, her fingers moved with purpose. The first note rang out clear and strong. It cut through the room in a way no one expected. Conversations stopped mid-word. Someone shifted in their seat. The sound did not rush or fade too quickly. It filled the space warm and steady. She played the second note, then the third. Slowly at first. Each sound carried weight, like a sentence spoken with care. The music did not demand attention. It earned it. She felt her fear loosen its grip with every note. The piano responded to her touch, steady and forgiving. Her fingers remembered what to do, guided by muscle memory built over countless quiet nights. The man who had mocked her leaned back, his smile fading. He did not speak. No one did. The room belonged to the music now. She continued, letting the melody grow naturally. It was simple but full, soft but confident, the kind of sound that made people lean in without realizing it, the kind that made time feel slower. She was no longer aware of who was watching. The faces around her blurred into the background. All that mattered was the feeling moving from her chest, through her hands, and into the air. The music carried pieces of her life. Long evenings alone. Small victories no one clapped for. Moments of doubt followed by quiet determination. Each emotion found its place in the sound. A few people shifted closer. Someone near the back stopped whispering. Glasses rested untouched on tables. Even the air seemed to hold still. Her playing grew stronger, not louder, but more certain. She trusted herself now. She let pauses breathe instead of rushing through them. She allowed silence to exist between notes, knowing it mattered just as much as sound. The piano filled the room, but it never overwhelmed it. Spoke gently yet clearly. It said things no argument ever could. She felt tears sting her eyes, but she did not stop. She had learned long ago that emotion was not weakness. It was fuel. The man near the piano watched closely now, his earlier confidence replaced by focus. He seemed to realize that something real was happening, something that could not be laughed away. As the melody reached its quiet peak, she played with complete trust in herself. No second guessing, no fear of mistakes. If a note was not perfect, she let it be. Perfection had never been her goal. The final notes approached slowly. She softened her touch, letting the sound fade naturally. The last note lingered in the air before disappearing completely. Silence followed. Not the awkward kind. Not the polite pause before applause. The silence was full, heavy with feeling. People looked at one another, unsure how to react. She kept her hands resting on the keys, breathing evenly. Her heart still raced, but her mind was calm. She had said what she needed to say. Someone cleared their throat softly. Another shifted in their chair. Still no one spoke. She opened her eyes fully and lifted her hands from the piano. For the first time since sitting down, she turned slightly, aware of the room again. The man who had mocked her earlier looked down, then back up, but did not smile. He did not laugh. He had no words. She stood slowly, not rushing, not waiting for permission. The bench scraped lightly against the floor. That small sound felt louder than it should have. As she stepped away from the piano, the silence remained, following her like a shadow. She did not know what would come next, but she knew one thing with certainty. They had heard her, and whatever happened after this moment, she would never doubt her voice again. The silence did not break right away. It stretched longer than anyone expected, hanging in the air like a held breath. She stood near the piano, unsure whether to return to her seat or leave the room entirely. Her legs felt light, almost weak, but her chest felt steady, as if something heavy had finally been set down. People slowly began to react. A few exchanged glances, trying to read each other's expressions. Some looked surprised. Others looked thoughtful. No one laughed. That alone felt strange, considering how the moment had begun. A soft clap came from somewhere near the back. It was hesitant, almost unsure if it was allowed. Then another followed. Soon, the room filled with applause, not loud or wild, but sincere. The kind of applause that grows because people truly feel it, not because they are expected to. She nodded slightly, more out of reflex than pride. She did not smile widely or bow. That was never her nature. She simply acknowledged the sound and began to walk back toward where she had been sitting. As she passed by the piano, she glanced at it one last time. For years, it had existed only in her private world. Now it had spoken for her in a room full of strangers. That thought stayed with her. She felt eyes follow her as she walked. Some faces held admiration. Others showed regret, as if people were rethinking earlier thoughts. A few looked embarrassed. She did not hold on to any of it. None of it mattered as much as it once might have. When she reached her seat, she sat down slowly and folded her hands in her lap. Her heart still beat fast, but not from fear anymore. It was the kind of rush that comes after being honest. The man who had mocked her earlier remained quiet. He shifted in his chair and avoided looking in her direction. His confidence had faded into something uncertain. She did not feel anger toward him. If anything, she felt a strange calm. His opinion no longer had weight. Someone nearby leaned closer and whispered a compliment. She thanked them quietly. Another person nodded at her with respect. Small gestures, but they felt genuine. The event continued, but the mood had changed. Conversations were softer now. When the piano was played again later, people listened more closely. The room had learned something, even if no one said it out loud. She sat and observed, feeling like an outsider and a part of the room at the same time. She realized that she had crossed an invisible line. She was no longer just someone who listened. She had been heard. As the evening went on, she reflected on how close she had been to walking away. How easily this moment could have never happened. That thought stayed with her, gentle but firm. Eventually, the gathering came to an end. People stood, gathered their things, and prepared to leave. A few stopped to speak with her, asking where she had learned to play, how long she had been practicing. She answered honestly, without exaggeration. She did not need to impress anyone now. One person told her she should play more often, maybe even perform. She smiled softly but did not promise anything. She knew herself well enough to know that growth would come in its own time. When she finally stepped outside, the night air felt cool and fresh. The noise from inside faded behind her. She stood still for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the night settle her. She thought about the younger version of herself, practicing quietly, never believing moments like this were possible. She wished she could tell that version not to hide so much, not to underestimate what persistence could do. As she walked home, the city sounds felt different, softer, as if they were part of a larger rhythm she had just joined. Her steps matched an invisible beat. She knew this moment would stay with her for a long time, not because of the applause or the reactions, but because she had faced her fear and stayed. Back in her room later that night, she sat once more at her old keyboard. The keys felt familiar, comforting. She played softly, not to relive the moment, but to return to herself. The notes flowed easily. There was no pressure, no audience. Just sound and feeling the way it had always been. Yet something had changed. She carried herself differently now. Not louder, not bolder in obvious ways, but steadier, more certain of her place. She understood that respect does not always come from demanding it. Sometimes it comes from standing still and letting truth speak. That night, as the final note faded in her quiet room, she allowed herself a small smile. The room that once doubted her had gone silent for a reason, and she was finally at peace with that. The days that followed felt quiet on the surface, but inside her, something steady had taken root. Life did not suddenly change in dramatic ways. She still woke up early, still followed the same routines, still moved through the world without drawing much attention. Yet everything felt slightly different, as if the ground beneath her feet was more solid than before. She returned to the community space again, but this time not by accident or quiet habit. She went because she wanted to. When she entered the room, a few people recognized her. Some smiled, some nodded. No one teased. No one questioned her presence. The piano sat in the same place, unchanged, but it no longer felt distant. She did not rush toward it. She listened just as she always had. But now, listening felt like a choice, not a limitation. She understood that silence could be powerful when it came from confidence, not fear. At home, her practice changed too. She still played late at night, still made mistakes, still repeated sections until they felt right. But she was kinder to herself. When her fingers slipped, she no longer felt frustrated in the same way. She understood that growth did not require punishment. Sometimes she thought about the man who had ridiculed her, not with anger, but with clarity. She realized that his words said more about his need to feel certain than about her ability. That understanding freed her from carrying resentment. Weeks passed, and her name was mentioned casually in conversations at the space. People spoke about her playing with respect, not exaggeration. She became an example people pointed to when discussing talent that does not look obvious at first glance. One evening, someone asked if she would play again. The request was gentle, without pressure. She considered it for a moment, then agreed. This time, there was no tension in the room. No whispers, just quiet attention. She played differently than before. Not stronger or more complex, but more open. She allowed herself to enjoy the moment fully. When she finished, the applause felt warm, but it was no longer the most important part. She realized then that the true change was not how others saw her, but how she saw herself. She no longer waited for permission to take up space. She no longer shrank to make others comfortable. Outside of music, this confidence slowly appeared in other areas of her life. She spoke up when something mattered. She set boundaries. She trusted her instincts more. People noticed, though few could explain exactly what had changed. They simply felt it. Presence does not need explanation. One night, after another quiet practice session, she closed the keyboard and sat still. She thought about how close she had been to staying silent forever. How easily fear could have decided her story. She understood now that courage does not always look like bold action. Sometimes it looks like staying seated when it would be easier to leave. Sometimes it sounds like a single note played honestly. She did not become famous. She did not seek a spotlight. That was never her goal. What she gained was something far more lasting. She gained trust in her own voice. The world did not suddenly become kinder or fairer. People still judged. Doubt still existed. But she knew how to stand steady within it. Music remained her companion, just as it always had been. A place of truth. A place where she could return whenever she needed grounding. And every time she placed her fingers on the keys, she remembered that moment when the room went quiet. Not because she demanded attention, but because she spoke honestly. That memory reminded her that real strength does not shout. It resonates. She carried that lesson with her, not as a story to tell, but as a way of living. And somewhere, in rooms full of noise and doubt, there would always be space for one true note to change everything.